All right, everyone. Well, good morning. It is Thursday, June 18th, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director with Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are at the end of week 14 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the news today, the Justice Department has asked the judge to immediately halt publication of John Bolton's new memoir, while state and local governments confront a new wave of coronavirus infections. Today's topic is women in tech, co-hosted by the XX Project. And our very special guest is Carolyn Tisch Blodgett, former head of global marketing at Peloton. Great to see you. Good morning.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So it's like every week I'm like week 4, week 5, and week 14, and it's kind of crazy.
I realized it was week 14 until you just said that.
It's my new calendar. We just kind of keep track. Well, this is the first week that we're actually doing this. Virginia is slowly reopening, and I'm in Northern Virginia, and this is my actual office. So for the first time, I didn't do a virtual background of a coffee shop. We're
Not my office.
Well, how have the last 14 weeks been going for you? Give us a quick kind of just like recap, like what's life at your house like, and how has this all been going on?
Yeah, not that glamorous, I would say. There's a lot of this happening in the background. We started working from home what seemed like pretty early at the time. We came out of New York City on March 7th. But unfortunately, we brought COVID with us, and my husband ended up getting sick and
No kidding.
My mother got sick, my in-laws got sick, everyone kind of around us was sick at the beginning. And I'm now 30 weeks pregnant. I guess I can do that math in my head, a few weeks less pregnant then. But it was just sort of everything piling on at once. You know, obviously everyone's job was completely changing, and we had 2 kids all of a sudden at home and no childcare, and quarantining my husband in another room. So there were some dark days in March. But thankfully he is better, and Good. Everyone around us is totally healthy. But, you know, I think everyone's struggling with how do you manage childcare and a job? Yeah. And obviously, you know, there's been a lot of articles about how it impacts women disproportionately than men. But I think, you know, you're a parent. I think everyone is struggling with this is a really trying time for our kids, and we want to be there for them. But we're also, you know, we have to also do our job. So how you balance that is really hard.
It's so funny. I want to talk more about this a little later, but like we had Anne Marie Slaughter from New America do one of these talks, and she wrote obviously the most prolific piece in 2012 about women can't have it all and so on. And part of the talk was like, have things really accelerated almost as like a silver lining of this to really catch up men, employers, corporate America about like the disproportionate impact and kind of unfair balance that falls on women, and like paid family leave and all these things that kind of, you know, were talked about but didn't really get enough attention. I mean, do you think now is maybe this catalyst that could potentially be a silver lining out of all this?
I hope so. I think I got the chance to interview Cecile Richards, actually,
nice.
The former head of Planned Parenthood, a few weeks ago. And what we spoke about is it's either, I think we're kind of at this crossroads where it's either going to be an impetus for real change, and companies will, and the government will finally recognize that people aren't just kind of part-time parents and part-time and full-time workers, that it actually, everyone that is a parent and is working, is they have to coexist, and we have to change policies and change the way our companies are structured to meet that. Or, so that's kind of the hope, is that this will be the impetus to change. Or there's a kind of the pessimistic side of me thinks that this could actually just set women's rights back, you know, many years. And that there's so, you know, there was an article in the New York Times. Now I'm forgetting the exact number, because sorry, I didn't know we were going to talk about it. But I think it was something like fathers thought that they were doing like 40% of homeschooling, and moms agreed, 3% of moms agreed with it, or something like that.
It was exactly 3%. You're spot on, because my wife sent it to me.
3% I held on to. Yes, I definitely held on to the 3%.
That was it.
I was not in that 3%. And, you know, so I think, unfortunately, there's been you know, it's too early to tell where this will land, but I think there's definitely a possibility that this unfortunately sets women back, because when having to make that trade-off, and obviously there's many women that can't make that trade-off and are forced to continue to work, but for a family that's fortunate enough to make that decision of who's going to stay home, I think, you know, by and large, it ends up being the woman. So it's too early to tell, I think, what this will do to society.
Interesting. Well, look, you're a couple of weeks off of this amazing kind of rapid roller coaster of a ride at Peloton. I would love to hear kind of your journey there? Like, how did you even end up there, and what have the last 4 years been like? And then, at the very end, like, what is the last 14 weeks? Like, what did that look like? Because, as someone who, I was shamed when I did my April report on Peloton. It was like, you've done 30 days in a row compared to like 2 days in a row the previous month. So it's, I imagine I'm not alone in that.
Yes, that is true. Yes, mine also said 30 days in a row for the first time last few months. So yeah, it's been, a roller coaster is the right way to describe, I think, the last 4 years. So I joined Peloton exactly a little over 4 years ago. A friend of mine from business school had actually interviewed for a role there. And when the person interviewing her described what she was looking for in this person, she said, my dream is someone that went to a school like Harvard Business School and worked at a place like Pepsi and led a big launch there. And she's kind of ticking all these boxes. And my friend is sitting in the interview saying, like, I don't really tick any of these boxes, but I have the perfect person for you. She called me.
Amazing.
And at the time, I wasn't looking, I never imagined myself at a startup. I didn't imagine myself in the health and wellness industry. It was always something that I was passionate about personally, but didn't really imagine a career in it. And I went and I interviewed, and I have such a vivid memory of sitting in this WeWork office with John Foley, our founder and CEO, co-founder and CEO. And at the time, he's kind of painting this vision of, I know no one's ever heard of Peloton right now, but one day in the next 5 years, we're going to revolutionize the fitness industry, and we're going to go public, and we're going to be one of the most special brands in the world. And I came home to Will, my husband, who and I said, I think, my husband is a grand visionary too, but I was like, I think I met someone crazier than you. And I think this person, he is talking about revolutionizing the fitness industry globally. And we are sitting in a WeWork on 29th Street with, 10 employees. And it just felt like I had experienced the product. My mom had actually had a bike, so I knew how revolutionary the product was. So I bought into this vision because I knew how good the product was. But it felt like this is so wild that this could actually happen that I just wanted to be a part of it.
And so like you buy into that vision, but could you even back then have imagined just like the immense and rapid growth like that you realized? I like, was this exactly like where you guys benchmarked 4 years ago? Like it would have gotten here? It seems to have just.
No, ironically, it's even faster than, so he had said 5 years from now, we'll be going public. And again, I kind of at the time thought, who knows what's going to, I don't even know if we'll be check in 5 years, but we'll try. So no, I think the growth has been even faster than any of us could have imagined. And when I joined, I was brought in under the person who was leading marketing at the time. And then she quickly left about 6 weeks after I joined. And then I was kind of catapulted into a much bigger leadership role. So all of a sudden, I not only was on this wild journey, but I was actually helping lead this wild journey. And it was completely not, what I had imagined. But I think now, I haven't had that much time to even look back and reflect because it's been so such a whirlwind. But no, everyone now kind of assumes, of course, Peloton was going to change the world, but it was not assumed at the time.
So when you have this kind of grand vision, you get in there and you have a marketing background, right? You have this really unique kind of trajectory of your career. How did you come up with like a marketing strategy to kind of grow the base, right? Like it seems like, I read this, you've said this before, right? That your own members sell more bikes than the company does, right? Like how do you come up with a strategy to build this kind of authenticity and loyalty? It's
wild. Well, and I think, building a strategy when you're literally just looking at a blank piece of paper is daunting. Yeah. And in some ways, I think a startup like Peloton is best able to do that because there was no playbook for how to, we weren't just building a startup and building a company, we were building an industry and there was no benchmarks. We never thought of ourselves as in the fitness industry. So what I would say we did was we were pretty methodical. And so when I got there, it kind of started from scratch and said, this is who our target is. So we identified who our target was and said, okay, so if this is the type of growth we want to reach, this is how we're going to do that. So we need to grow awareness. Nobody knows that we did our first awareness study. Nobody knew that Peloton existed. So first we need to grow awareness. We need to educate people on this new category because we created a new category. And then slowly we need to shift into more what I would call kind of consideration. So how do we start breaking down barriers to purchase and get people to consider Peloton that wouldn't normally consider it. So that's kind of the path we went on. And it was pretty methodical in how we approached it. But, you know, again, looking back, it kind of seems easy to say that was the right vision, but at the time it was, you know, really starting from scratch. And your point on, is there was no playbook. I think your point on word of mouth and the role of our community, that was probably the least expected part of the journey. Yeah. So, you know, I could write out a strategy of building awareness to this target and then getting to purchase intent. But what we didn't really realize, I think, in the early days was that we had also created as a byproduct one of the most special and fanatical communities in the world. And that really starts, you know, I wish I could pat myself on the back and give myself credit for that, but I can't. That really starts with a fantastic product. And so creating a great product that people are so incredibly loyal to, as you said, you've ridden 30 days in the last 30 days. That's kind of at its core. And then we as the marketing team can layer onto that and think about what are the types of things you would want to share. You know, even the fact that you know that you've ridden 30 days, like that's the type of thing we can add on the marketing side once we identified how big of a role word of mouth played. But I truly believe it starts with a fantastic product, which we had in Peloton.
I mean, I feel like I watched The Last Dance with Alex Toussaint. I think it was just he and I there. Yes, exactly. Ali Love makes Val cry because she calls her a boss. I mean, it's really created this kind of amazing like influencer loyalty. So congrats. I mean, it's so incredible. I mean, but as you look back at your career, right? Like Yale undergrad, Harvard Business School, you know, you went to the agency world, you did Pepsi, you know, we have lots of, you know, people tuning in today. I'm so excited the XX Project and, you know, a lot of women out there who are looking at like what their next move is, what their next step is. How do you kind of give advice to folks who are thinking about, you know, your background being so diverse and then landing at a startup, right? I mean, it wasn't necessarily likely something you planned, right? So what's your kind of advice as you mentor and talk to women who want to get into tech or think about their career and their own trajectory?
So I would say overall, kind of taking out just specifically to women, but I would say overall, when I think about my career, I think I started out, I'm a very linear thinker, I'm very type A, I assumed that all careers followed a very specific path. Yeah. And what I realized, even though it's felt so cliche that everyone tells you, you know, your career will be circuitous and you don't know where the next thing will land. And it felt like the kind of thing you like hear old people talk about and you don't really listen to. But I do feel like looking back, each experience I've had has been pretty different and didn't totally make sense as the next step, but I've gotten so much out of each of them. So for example, starting my career at an agency was incredibly humbling. I think realizing that, you know, I thought coming out of Yale that I was going to change the world. And then I was sitting there proofreading terms and conditions for a direct mail piece that most people probably weren't going to read. And so, you know, but I think there's so much value in that because now being on the other side, I know how hard those people on the agency side are working. I know I want to respect their opinion and I'm always looking to bring their voices in because I felt like I didn't really have a voice when I was there. And then same when I was at Pepsi. I mean, you know, I thought I was, you know, a little more senior in my career, but I still, you know, I technically had a seat at the table, but still really no one cared what I had to say. And so I feel like I've learned so much. I'm a better leader because of those other roles that I've had. Right. So I would say the first thing is just, you know, being open to different types of experiences because there's actually so much you can gain from each of these different experiences, even if it's not exactly, you know, on your resume what you thought it was going to be. You know, I would say for women in particular, it's obviously, you know, there's a lot of challenges with being a woman in tech, a woman in business overall. Yeah. I think what I struggled with was when I got to Peloton is that I was the first, one of the first senior women at Peloton. And I was fortunate to have a really supportive boss in John, our founder, and he couldn't have wanted to be more supportive of, you know, having a senior woman on the team. And particularly, I was the only one with a young child, but my daughter at the time was 1. But being supportive is different than actually living in those shoes. And so again, he wanted to be supportive, but then he would schedule a lot of the conversations and decisions would happen kind of around someone's desk at 8:00 at night. And I wasn't there for those. And so, or they would schedule a call, but there was, it would be at 7:00 and that's when I was putting my daughter to bed. So
Sure.
I really felt like I had to advocate for myself and show them why, we should have a platform like Zoom or Google Hangouts so that I can actually call into meetings and not just be on people's cell phones, like half hearing. And so what I would say, my advice to women, thinking about their career in tech is really both at the more junior levels, looking for organizations that have that leadership, because it is so important to have someone that can really advocate. But then as you continue to grow in your career, you become that advocate. And I felt so much pressure, but in a positive way, pressure to, once I was in that role, to really support the junior women at Peloton and feel like they don't always have a seat at the table. I need to provide that seat for them. And I want to lift up their voices so that it's not, I have one perspective. I don't have everyone's perspective. So I really wanted to play that role and help advocate for them.
So let's bifurcate that real quick, right? So you having a seat in the C-suite, I feel like that has a material impact on the growth and success of Peloton experience, right? Just like everything. So talk about that. Like, how important is it for just like, companies listening, owners, founders, to really be thoughtful about the leadership teams they're putting together?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. Again, it's something you always hear about, and I didn't really, of course, in my mind, in theory, it felt like, of course, you should have diversity at, at every level of the organization. Sure. But I, after having lived through it the last few years, I really do see the importance of it and the impact of it, because again, you can be the most open-minded person and think that you're the most progressive leader and you're open to all voices, but not all, until you have someone there representing those voices, they're not going to be heard. And, for example, I was the first woman at Peloton to take maternity leave or parental leave. And again, the senior team was so supportive in theory of me. I was so nervous to tell John when I was pregnant. And he was so supportive, but then the policy was terrible and no one had thought about it. And because they wrote it when there were 4 guys sitting around building Peloton. So, without those voices there to fight for it. And now there've been, I've had 3 people on my team go on maternity leave and they've had a fantastic experience with it. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't pushed for it. So you do need those voices there to advocate for other people, because, you could be the most progressive person in the world, but you just might not think about what is actually needed for everyone else's experience.
That's great. I just want to remind everyone tuning in, we have a Q&A function that you can on Zoom here. If you have any questions you want to toss out there, we'll try to get to them. So look, you were ahead of the curve on Zoom. You were ahead of the curve on Peloton. What are you thinking as you kind of pause, enjoy more time with family, and about to have a third? Congratulations, and thinking about the future. What's your current plan or thoughts about the future?
Yeah. So obviously I had made this decision to leave before a global pandemic and my kids were home indefinitely. So I thought there was going to be a little more time for reflecting than there has been. But what I wanted to spend this time doing is really, taking a bit of time to reflect, but I'm excited to and think about, what I want to do next, but I'm excited to be able to share my expertise and my experience with other companies. I think it's so unique to be able to live through a period of growing a company from nothing to something. And you don't often, as I've always said to my team, is the ability to actually create a brand from scratch is so unique, and so few people get the chance to do that. Yeah. So I've now been fortunate enough to be able to do that, but I would love to be able to share that with other organizations as well.
Nice. So as you take a step back and look, last 14 weeks, pandemic, it throws everybody's plans off, right? For life, for your company, your strategic plan, everything. So as you look at what you in the last few weeks kind of did at Peloton and how they grew and succeeded, what advice do you have for companies thinking about how do you reach consumers? How do you build some kind of loyalty now moving forward as there's so much happening in the world, right? Dealing with racial inequality, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with so much uncertainty. How do you kind of cut through the noise and even reach consumers and get your product out there?
Yeah. Yes. The last 14 weeks definitely have been probably the most interesting as a marketer. I would say, so I guess a few things. One is, one of the things I think we've benefited from at Peloton is that we've never been able to sit back and develop a strategy a year out and stick to it. We've always been in the game of pivoting to whatever it is, whether it's,
Sure.
Sell more bikes, or whether it was, something that's happening in culture. So as a company, being able to, you build a strategy and then you need to change it. So being comfortable with inevitable change, I think, is so important, obviously now more than ever. Even just from how are you going to go create a new marketing campaign when everyone's working from home and you can't go produce something? So being able to be flexible and change is obviously, number one, so important. The second thing I think we thought about was, what is the right message again now? So the world is completely different than it was 3 months ago, and a message that might not have seemed offensive at the time may feel tone deaf. So thinking about what the right message is that resonates. But I would say kind of beyond that, I think one of the things I've always felt strongly about is marketing should never be the kind of center of what you do, in the sense that it can't just be, or maybe I said that wrong. It should never just be about a message that you're putting out there. And if you're spending all your time thinking about your messaging and not what you're actually doing, you're probably spending your time in the wrong place. So think about what your product actually does to help people at this specific time, and focus on that. Or what else can your product be doing to help people, and focus on that. I mean, we are fortunately in the position of being in a business that enables people to be healthier from home. So we very quickly pivoted to one of the things, we did a few things, but one of them was we expanded our digital product. So our app only product to a 3-month subscription. So people could access Peloton from home, and more people could access Peloton. So that was just one of the things we could do. But think about what is your core product proposition? What's the type of thing that you can uniquely do? And focus on that rather than, what the right message is. I think very quickly, a lot of companies put out ads with, some beautiful piano music set to some pictures of healthcare workers, working on the front lines. And while, I think at first they were beautiful and moving, people started to feel like, okay, but this is just a message. What are you actually
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so critical, right? Like mission over message. And I think, just tuning in and riding more than I used to, it was almost like you could track the pandemic and the experience from, people were still in studio, and then it was just the instructor with no one in the studio. And then as you were in homes with the instructors, right? And it was kind of like this visceral experience where you were like tuning in. And I think even at a time where like people are content hungry, it wasn't just a workout. It was like, so it was just very interesting. So I think it's just fascinating. So when you sit down and write your book, I think it'll be a hot seller.
I definitely need my kids back in school if there's a book on the way.
Yeah, I know. We were watching TV the other day, and it was like kids were walking to school, and I told Val, "You remember when kids went to school?" Isn't that, we got a question from Kara Strauss. She's a recent grad, and she was asking what you see as new emerging areas in tech that might be interesting for new grads, job hunters to focus on.
Good question. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely tech in general. I think at a certain point we'll stop calling companies tech companies because everyone will be a tech company. But I would say overall, I think there's obviously been a shift to home in the last few months. So thinking about, rethinking about how the home works through tech, I think will be a space that is flourishing in the next few months. But I would actually almost say to flip the question and think about what is, because as I said before, tech, everything will be tech eventually, tech enabled. So what are the areas that you're really passionate about? What are the industries that you see as needing disrupting? I think home fitness, for Peloton as the example, was an area where the founders realized, they loved fitness, but it wasn't they loved boutique fitness. It wasn't working for them in its current capacity. I would say the same thing. Think about any of the tech companies in the last few years that have been successful. It was people thinking about, there is this industry that has been run. Think about Warby Parker as kind of the classic example, but they all wore glasses and realized, why am I paying $400 for these expensive glasses?
Yeah.
That's not actually what they cost to produce them. So there's, I would say, think about any industry that you live in and how tech can disrupt it, and kind of focus your energy there, because there is room for disruption in almost every industry.
and that's why I'm throwing all my eggs in virtual coffees with me, because I think that's what everyone wants, is missing in this market. We have one more question real quick. A friend actually from the Upper West Side, Nigel Ferry, he's an entrepreneur. He has a young tech company, but they're mostly comprised 80% of men. So he's asking very specifically, what do you think they need to do to truly address the need for women leaders at their company?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the statistics of what Peloton was when I joined, but my guess is it was probably close to 80% men as well. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to thinking about what is the right culture, what are the systematic things you need to put in place to attract women, and then what is a culture that's going to make women feel comfortable working there. So, whether it's easy to kind of go to the policies of, do we have the right parental leave and all of that, but also what's just the everyday culture. As I said before, when all the decisions are being made standing around someone's desk at 8:00 at night, that's actually not that family friend. And I'm just speaking about women as, parents, but obviously there's a lot of other needs that women have, but, there's so much data behind women tend to not always advocate for themselves. So what systems are you putting in place so that women are mentored and that promotions aren't just happening because someone's asking for a promotion, but there's actually a plan in place so that even if I don't feel comfortable advocating for myself, my manager's advocating for me. So thinking about, what are all the different systems that are going to make every type of person feel comfortable working in your environment, I would say is, the place to start.
Excellent. Well, look, I am so happy you took the time to be here. I know it's been a wild and crazy few months with, family and work and all this stuff, but it's been incredibly wonderful and exciting to just hear from you on some of these exciting ideas. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And everyone tuning in, thank you. This was Coffee with Ken with Carolyn Tisch Blodgett, the former head of global marketing for Peloton. And we all can't wait to see what she does next. Our next conversation is next Tuesday, June 23rd. We're going to be discussing Amazon's HQ2 in Northern Virginia. We're going to be joined by Matt Kelly, the CEO of JBG Smith, Ardeen Williams, the VP of Workforce for Amazon, and Brian Kenner, the head of policy for Amazon. So it should be fun. Carolyn, thank you. Best to Will and the family, and have a great summer.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, everyone.